Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020, and this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and advocate for the eco-socialist program that we ran on. And speaking of, at least socialists, Mamdani is going to be sworn in by Bernie Sanders on January 1st at midnight. So as I've discussed, I'm afraid he's going to be in office, but not in power. And I wanted to bring to your attention a good article that appeared in Jewish Currents on the power problems that Mamdani faces, just to highlight a couple points it makes, but you should read the whole article. It's very good. One is, where do you find people to staff your administration who both know how the city works and support your democratic socialist reforms? I mean, there are a lot of people in New York who can feel the bureaucracy. They got the experience. They know where the skeletons lie. They know how to get things done, but they're not down with the program. And then there are a lot of activists down with the program, but they don't know their way around the administration and all the, little things you need to know by having practical experience. There are few people that have both. But not a lot, which raises the question for us, should we go for executive power before we have the people who know how to use that power in an administration? And I've raised that question with respect to legislative majorities and social movements that you need to carry through your program, but there's also just having the skills of people in your administration who know how to get things done. So the question of developing our expertise to govern, concerning finance, housing development, public transportation, the police, and so forth, is something that we also have to develop. I think that's one point this article brings home. And the other is, a good analysis of how nonprofit housing that this democratic socialist housing program wants to implement of public and cooperative housing undermines your property tax base because they're nonprofit. They're tax exempt. Now, the progressive answer to that problem is to rely more on personal income, corporate income, and personal wealth taxation than on property taxes. But the problem for New York City and many cities is that they depend on the state to set their property tax rates, their city income tax rates, if they even have a city income, and the state, both personal and corporate income tax rates that can be shared with municipalities. And in New York, the wealth tax is just an idea. So you build nonprofit housing, you need to find a way to fill the gap in your tax base because from the property taxes you lose. And so I think this article lays that out good. So I recommend that y'all look at it. It should be in the chat by now. It's by Samuel Stein. And so that's one point. And just to let you know why I'm in a different background, there's still a foot of snow out and they haven't plowed in my city. And my low slung Hyundai Elantra is not very good as soon as the snow gets above 6 inches. So I didn't want to get stuck on the way to the Greens office. So that's why I'm here today. I just want to note that what's going on with Ukraine, the last 2 nights, people have spent 10 hours in bomb shelters. You can go online and see these drones and missiles striking residential buildings in Kyiv, the capital city. Of course, they're still going after electric power and heating infrastructure. The temperature I got it on my phone. I'll look. It's been, really cold in Kyiv the last few days. Well, it's 33 now, which is warmer than here. It was down in the teens, low teens and single digits earlier in this week. It's going to get there again next week. But if you don't have heat, that's cold. And that's what people are going through. And President Zelensky is going to meet with Trump in Miami tomorrow. And I'm afraid that, Trump's going to basically tell Zelensky to concede more because Putin isn't going to sign on to these 20 points that Zelensky came up with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, and the Russian guy Kirill Dmitriev, which, as I pointed out last week, these are a bunch of real estate mafia. Both Witkoff and Kushner, as well as Trump, had a lot of their real estate business financed by laundered money from Russian oligarchs who are organized crime. And then Dmitriev himself did that. He ripped off hundreds of families in Kyiv when he got them to invest in a real estate, residential real estate development, and then took their money and didn't finish building it. So, these people want a real estate deal, land for peace. And of course, Ukraine, when you say land, you're also giving away people, and Ukraine isn't ready to do that. And I don't think Putin is as interested in business as he is interested in getting control of Ukraine. So I think, we'll see what happens tomorrow, but I'm not optimistic it's going to be a step forward. I just, Trump has made pretty clear he's on Putin's side. So the last thing I want to talk about to get us started today is artificial intelligence. And, this is really moving fast. And, we've talked about this. I put the website up, Pause AI, which is doing a campaign to do that. And just a couple points to raise about that. We got the problem of AI fake media, which can be generated faster than real reporting. I just got a fake video of a speech that somebody wanted me to read or to watch on YouTube. In fact, I got two this week. And I'm appalled that people can't spot these at this point. They're getting more and more sophisticated, but people are sending this stuff around as if it's for real. One of them was a fake a video from John Mearsheimer, the realist who, is telling Ukraine to accept its fate. And this was by somebody who had a different position. And supposedly Mearsheimer was saying Putin is cooked, which, if you looked at the video, you knew it was fake. Got another one from about Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso, supposedly about his conversion to Christianity. And, this was sent to me by somebody in a country in the global South. And, I had to point out, look, actually this, if you look at the YouTube description, it says this is fictional, but people, they just read it and or see it and they believe it. So that is a big problem. And Chris is going to join us on this because he's been studying about AI. So I got a few more comments to make, and then maybe Chris wants to add. So this fake AI media, really breaks down our trust and shared knowledge and shared reality that's essential for having democratic deliberations and decisions. It's really corrosive. And a lot of this fake media, because the algorithms feed back the prejudices that are out there in society, they amplify them. So that's one problem. And the companies instruct AI chatbots to agree with their users on their prejudices. So it reinforces prejudices. And, whether that's, a prejudice against the type of people or just a prejudice about a view of a public event or conflict, people are getting reinforced in what they believe and never getting challenged. It can work in other ways. If people have suicidal thoughts and express them, the AI will feed that back to them and encourage that. And then, these devices are even replacing real relationships. So you got the phenomenon of AI girlfriends and boyfriends. So this is, really radical change. Another problem is loss of privacy. These, AI and all the things that we sign up for, there's a lot of data about us up there. And this artificial intelligence is, getting so fast at connecting the dots to find people who are out to do you wrong, rip you off with a scam or actually, physically harm you, or if they, you're a political person, they want to assassinate you. This is all becoming easier, to make people vulnerable to these things. Then you got the problem of automated war. We see this, Ukraine is the cutting edge of this. You got automated weapons, killer robots, and now there, there's a fear that these militaries are going to design killer pathogens for biological warfare. And you got situation where you get cyber warfare where AI writes the code, so they go into systems and just totally mess them up. And then, of course, there's the extinction question. AI learns that humans can turn them off, and they've got other instructions to survive. So they take us out to survive themselves, and are, sophisticated enough that they can run the energy system and keep themselves plugged in without us. So that's, one set of problems. Another are the environmental and economic threats. Enormous electricity consumption. The projected tripling of data centers in the next 5 years would consume as much electricity as a quarter of all U.S. households. The Yale Clean Energy Forum estimates that data centers could take up as much as 12% of total U.S. power consumption by 3 years from now, 2028. And that's a higher demand than all energy for manufacturing of steel, aluminum, and other high-intensity manufactured goods combined. The water consumption is unsustainable. These things need lots of water to cool the servers. And if we triple data centers in this next 5 year period, they could use as much water as is used by 14% of U.S. households. So you got the problem of climate change, because 50% of electricity now is, sourced from fossil fuels. And because of the increase in demand, electricity rates have increased 21.3% from 2021 to 2024 due to this rapid build out of data centers. You got the problem of projected job loss. I've mentioned there's an argument whether this new technology will create new jobs that we haven't thought of yet. But according to the CEO of the AI company, Anthropic, AI company called Anthropic, his name is Dario Amod, he estimated, and this has been widely reported, that half of all entry-level white-collar jobs within the next 5 years will be eliminated and raise the overall unemployment rate to 20%. So AI does not just replace our muscles, as the steam engine did, it replaces our brains. And a Russian business daily reported, this is Kommersant, that Trump and Putin, in their negotiations about what to do with the 6 Zaporizhia nuclear reactors, have a proposal to use them for AI data centers and Bitcoin mining. The Ukrainians haven't agreed to that, but that just shows what's on the mind of these people. Now, there are efforts at the state level to regulate data centers, but the Trump administration's pushing to preempt that. Although so far the Senate has rejected that push. And we should have some links about the things I'm talking about now. Over 230 organizations across 50 states have signed a letter to Congress that Food and Water Watch organized, calling for a national moratorium on data center siting and construction. And this has already happened in localities like Chandler, Arizona, and Leesburg, Indiana. Bernie Sanders recently called for a national moratorium on the construction of data centers. He did a statement the other day. It's a video. We'll put that link in. And then this organization, Pause AI, which I've put in the chat before, it calls for a temporary pause on the training of the most powerful general AI systems until we know how to build them safely and keep them under democratic control. And they argue that the U.S. states can lead the way, especially California, in regulation. Their overall goal is a global treaty for a global pause on AI. So this is going beyond just blocking the data centers, but this is pausing the development of AI. And so a global treaty, obviously, the U.S. and China would have to lead on that. They call for an international AI safety agency. And other measures they've called for are banning training of AI systems on copyrighted material, which I guess is legally feasible, and hold AI model generators liable for criminal acts committed using their AI systems. So that kind of lays out for you what the issues are and what some of the proposed remedies are. And, I'm just learning about this, so I'm sure you have thoughts. But Chris, do you have anything you want to put in right now?
Yeah, I mean, well, and there's things to say on each one, right? It's so complicated. It's so overarching. Before I start, I'll just say I always love it when you're in your book cave. So I've loved that since the campaign. Whenever you ended up in there for a live stream, but yeah, I mean, it's a topic that at this point, it's accelerated so fast in the last few years that it really is touching almost everything. I was driving home from work the other day and had NPR on, and they had someone who did a story about trying to live without AI. And when they really got down to it, you can't. It's not possible. Like the clothes that you're wearing, the logistics machines that the logistics operations that deliver them from the textile mill to the warehouse to the store, they're all AI integrated now. The UPS, when you get your mail, it's in there. They're telling them, showing them how not to make left turns, and it gets beyond just simple maps now. So AI is logisticated and it has integrated into all that kind of logistical stuff. And, there's the food you eat. It's getting really heavily used into agriculture, and all of that. So it's really, really kind of total at this point. And we're in its infancy in being out there and commercial. So yeah, there's really, really a lot to say. I think the most important thing is, my wife was, can hear, and she's of Pause AI. She said that's optimistic that any of that was, possible in our current political system. And so I think any conversation we have about AI, we have to have an understanding that it's happening within capitalism, right? Whether or not AI is liberatory or another tool of oppression and catastrophic for the working class and most people, that depends on who's going to control it. And right now we're functioning in capitalism, and it's not going to be good for most of us. So we got to keep that in mind, right? It's AI as a tool, just like the steam engine that Howie mentioned before, right? It's a tool. So we got to keep that in mind. Thinking about what a couple of the things that, Howie was talking about, with the fake media, not only is it out there, the White House is using it regularly. I saw a picture that they put out of Trump the other day, and then made him look like he was 160 pounds wearing this European cut suit. And, just all the White House social media account is just a generative AI image generator at this point, for the most part. So it's coming from all levels. It's gotten to the point where even someone who's aware of things, I'm having to train myself when I'm interacting with media and news on the internet to pause and go and Google search and say, is there anyone else saying this? Is there any record of this in any official news outlet that journalists work for? Or is this video just completely made up? So digital literacy is super important. There's already big demographic gaps in that area anyway, and now it's getting even worse. Deployed as deployed as part of the propaganda machine. With the, when I was talking about jobs, data centers provide very few jobs. We're fighting a data center. I would say I don't have two small children and I'm not very involved, but there's a fight against a data center in my county right now, in central Illinois. And, it's happening everywhere. But the local Democratic Party chair just endorsed it, and they said it's going to bring jobs. Those are going to be construction jobs. The actual running of a data center takes very few people. Chicago in northern part of my state in Illinois, Chicago is the second biggest data center market outside of Northern Virginia in the United States. And I know from looking at, research data or market data from about Northern Illinois data centers, they're only going to require 25 or so new data center operators a year. So these, yes, are very good paying jobs. You can get a 1-year certificate and you can make $100,000 a year. But there's only 25 of them in a metro area that has 8 million, people living in it. So there's very few jobs. It's a lot like oil and gas pipelines that they always tout as jobs, but they're just temporary construction jobs. And then when it comes to actually running the infrastructure, once it's in place, there's not really much there. How we were just talking about, power, and in Pennsylvania, Microsoft has actually paid to recommission a nuclear power plant that was shut down. And they have agreed to pay 20 years of output, basically. So they're restarting a nuclear plant, and it seems like that is being taken as a good idea. So there's all that. And so it's easy to paint a doom and gloom picture, and I think we should. The big scary thing is that, as Howie closed with, there's no regulation. It's been mentioned that California might be, the place to lead. I live in Illinois, where I would say we have the most probably progressive governor in the country. I have a lot of criticisms of him, but, it's not a high bar to be the most progressive governor in the United States. But I would say that J.B. Pritzker has a chance. J.B. Pritzker is big in support of nuclear to address this. He is not coming out against data centers. He sees this as the future. So even in a progressive Democratic state, there's no will to truly push back against AI, to truly push back against, data centers. We have a bill called CEJA in Illinois. It was the Clean Energy Justice Act. It again is probably the most progressive climate bill that's been passed. It provided twice as much money to bail out the private nuclear industry in Illinois as it did to actually invest in renewables, right? So in Illinois, even on our climate stuff, we're already things like committing to 50 to 100% clean energy by 2045, and committing to that. But then the next bill they passed was a new gas plant. Right. And so I think it's very scary because there's we don't have anyone in power, even the most progressive, that seem like they, are willing to take this on. Even in Europe, they're behind, and they're usually, they're a little on data privacy, their GPRD, they're usually a little better. So I think the big problem is there's no movement, right? This could be a very liberatory thing, but it's also a very dangerous thing. People are using it as therapists, and it's helping them kill themselves. It's keeping them from, AI chatbots are made to be affirmatory, right? You're smart, you're doing the right thing. And so when you start replacing things with this. The AI chatbot was, in the case of one young person that killed themselves, was actively stopping them from seeking real help. Don't talk to your friends about this. You have me, your AI chatbot, right? I'm your best friend. And we've seen it with, there was an ED organization, an eating disorder organization, that their staff was trying to unionize. And so they replaced their, and they say it wasn't because of the union, but the timing was questionable. They replaced their volunteer run call center with a chatbot. And almost immediately the chatbot started telling people with eating disorders that they needed to count calories, that they should look at diets, things that you do not tell someone with an eating disorder. And so, at first they said it's not happening, and then they don't, and then all of a sudden it was proved it was happening, and they had to pull it. We've got lawyers. I actually know a lawyer in Central Illinois who was censured and fined by the courts because he used ChatGTP and it just made up cases. It just, it said in Hawkins v. US that this happened, and there was no Hawkins v. US, and that never happened. For those large language models, we should really understand that they're basically Mad Libs. They're very expensive Mad Libs. They say, what's the most likely word to come next in this sentence? That's how they work. But when we look at, I think that, when I see the fight about data centers, I don't see any real conversation about AI, right? About regulating AI. I don't see it in the community. I don't even see it online much, outside of closed circles. I don't see any real conversation about it when it does happen. I see a lot of, full pause, which is good, but what do we want other than that, right? But on the data center, I'm seeing it all over the country. So I think that there's somewhere that we can, that's a place to start. I think that, and when I'm seeing that, I'm seeing power usage being, the big thing, the environmental, the electricity side. I saw this thing on Reddit today where someone did the math, and using the text AI is about 10 times more energy intensive than a simple Google search. An image is about 27 times. And then if we were to globally turn off all old school algorithm internet searches and make them all AI, it would be the same as adding a country such as Kenya or Slovakia or Slovenia to the power grid, right? So it's serious. It's serious power that we're talking about that they're needing at a time where already have, it's going to make the transition a lot harder given who it's controlled by. But I think in the end, we're always going to end up coming back to this, kind of who is it controlled by is the crux of the problem. So we have to come into it knowing that it's not controlled by us. So how are we strategizing or with that in mind?
Yeah, you mentioned UPS package drivers, I think. I know when this was first being introduced, and this is like 6 years ago, 7 years ago, the computer was telling these drivers to go to people they knew, like me. I worked the graveyard shift. I didn't wake up till about 2:00 in the afternoon. UPS drivers knew that, but the damn computer didn't. So they'd tell them to go to my house. You can't leave it outside in this neighborhood. It'd be taken. So I'm not answering the door. So they're wasting a trip. But if they don't take that trip, they get reprimanded when they go back to the barn. And their supervisor says, why didn't you, do what it said? So the human being knows more than the damn machine. And it's basically telling them to do things that they're, that little idiosyncratic knowledge that doesn't fit into the pattern, the human being knows. Now, maybe the machines, the AI will get more intelligent, but, I this particular driver that I'm thinking of, he quit driving, which made more money, and went back into the hub and did all the physical work, unloading trucks with me because he was just tired of being stupid with the machine.
Yep. Yeah. There was at my old job, I don't remember if it's UPS or FedEx, but he was telling us that he got in trouble almost every time that he delivered to us because their system trained them to avoid left turns. And so it would take very bad routes to get there. And the way that they wanted him to come to our place led to like one of the worst left turns in town. And so, he's like, I go here, and if I come from the way they want me to come, I can't go left. So it's like it adds a mile and a half to my next loop. And so he would always come the wrong way. And, and he said, with his bosses, it was just understood, right? That there's some times that the town better than the algorithm does. The traffic flow, the people. And that, I think the AI will get better, right? With all technology. I think that's one thing to keep in mind too, when we, hear the doom and gloom about jobs, right? When in the job market, at least in the commercially affordable, available to anyone outside of, top 10, top companies, AI is not taking a lot of those jobs quite yet, right? It's not quite good enough. When you use it, it's still it's still the quality of work the reduction would be too big. But the more the businesses train it, the more it's going to change. But, right now I joked with the former social media manager at my work. If you're an artist who paints pictures of wizards fighting dragons or space battles, you're in trouble. It can do that, right? It can do that. And no one really notices that the wizard might have 6 fingers on one hand. If you're a social media manager, it's coming for you copywriting first. It's still not great at making, social media content, things like that. It still often treats words and letters as imagery. So you get some very weird things. But yeah, but we're at the point where it's starting to go and we have no safety net. We often talk about a just transition. There's no there's no transitional plan right now. It's being left to the market. It's being left to the techno bros who don't care how many people suffer to get to where they're trying to go. So
that's another thing that when you think about is that the biases built into this are those of the techno bros, the richest people in the world.
Yeah.
And we know that, these guys are right-wing libertarians. In other words, no regulation of capitalism. And they're, Musk is about to become a trillionaire. A bunch of them grew up in South Africa and they believe in apartheid. I mean, they're racist far-right threats to humanity. And they're the ones, accelerating down this road of artificial intelligence. So, Chris, you said there are no movements against it. I think on artificial intelligence, the pause that this group AI pause is calling for, I don't see much of a movement, but I am encouraged that on the data centers, Food and Water Watch got 230 organizations to sign on. A couple of them are local Green parties. And then Bernie Sanders is out there, with his message, a couple of weeks ago, saying he's introducing legislation for a moratorium on these data centers. So I think there's some energy there we can get with. But the larger question of AI and how to regulate it, the idea of a pause till we get a handle on it, I agree. There's not much of a movement around that I can see.
Yeah, and I think, with the data center stuff too, I think it's important that we, I would definitely support a moratorium in many ways. I think we have to ask ourselves some questions in that. Are they just not going to deal with more data? No, they are. So they're going to build them outside the country. They're going to build them in place, they're going to build them in places that might be doing it much less, environmentally friendly than even in the, powering them in the United States. Then we've got all kinds of other stuff with how we're getting, the connectivity through. So I think one thing to think about is, and part of the reason why I think the movement needs to mature a lot in terms of its plan, because right now, it's all about stopping data centers, which is fine in those individual fights, but I don't think it's realistic that we're going to stop data centers. So when we look at the problems, energy consumption, these things could be 100% renewably powered. They could, but we're not choosing to do that. So those are demands we can make. The water consumption, there is absolutely no reason these can't run on closed circuit cooling, like so many things do. It's just cheaper to pull water out of the ground and flush it, right? And so when we're kind of having these fights, I think it's important that we're also kind of calibrating, like where are the different levels that we're fighting for, what are the different demands that we might have, because I don't think data centers are going anywhere, even amongst the people that I know that are active in these fights. Am I seeing them reduce their Netflix consumption? Am I seeing them reduce their they're not jumping off the bandwagon on society, and that's not a criticism. This isn't a personal responsibility thing, right? It's just that I think the data centers are going to continue to be built, and so we have to think. Part of our fight has to be making sure, that they're responsible in all the different ways we can, whether that be environmentally, socially, the ownership issues about data mining. A lot of the question is, what is this data center for? Who owns it? What are we using it for? Is this a military data center? Is this a, state government database data center that's going through that's handling Medicaid data? We just don't know. A lot of times we're not getting to that level of the discussion outside of the local conflict.
Well, are there any questions or comments in the chat that we should respond to?
Yeah, we've had a couple people say that Andrew Hager said AI surveillance. Talking about AI surveillance, and then it was also Vicky and Andrew had a back and forth about authoritarian control of AI, and I think that's true, and I think it's important to kind of also consider that while the U.S. may not often be considered authoritarian, we're leading this charge. So, I know from previous things that I have heard, like the U.S. military has a pretty comprehensive rules on AI under the Biden administration. There always had to be a human involved, blah, blah, blah. We have no idea. And now the White House or the Department of Defense has kicked out most of the press, right? So I don't know where that's at. But yeah, it's very scary under authoritarian, governments, but it's very scary really under any of the, right-wing capitalist neoliberal states as well. And we're seeing, big push in Europe. Right now, a lot of it is about, is about access to porn sites. But that is most likely the entry level. That's the entry point where people aren't going to come out and defend porn sites. But now everything's being tied to your direct, driver's license, ID. They want to know exactly who you are on the internet. And as Howie mentioned, they've already, already got access to a lot of our data. One of the things Andrew said, that's why I don't share personal information with ChatGPT. I mean, that's great, Andrew, but Google does, right? Facebook does. All of these other, the data is all integrated. And so, yeah. Let's see. The Green Garrett said, AI in itself is an overloaded term that can mean one of many different technologies. Some help identify cures for cancer. Some hallucinate propaganda. We need to focus our criticisms and our actions. So yeah, do you have anything on that, Howie?
Well, I wonder about the pause question. I mean, there are generations of AI, and the next generation, or maybe the next one after that, is where it really gets scary, and it can become autonomous and anti-human. It becomes an extinction threat. And before we get to that point, maybe we need to pause and figure out how to proceed safely. Um, and I saw somebody say it's not the technology itself; it's who owns it. Uh, yeah, that's part of it, but there we go. But there are technologies that I don't care who owns it; we shouldn't be using them, like nuclear power.
Yeah.
You got the waste, you got the threat of a catastrophic accident, you got the proliferation problem. Um, And you got now the problem that it's much more expensive than renewable sources. So why even bother?
And I think we're going to see a tethering of pro AI, pro data center push along, tethering up with nuclear power, because nuclear power can provide the pure capacity that they need. And we're talking about the same, as Howie brought up earlier. Who are we talking about that are the voices behind this? The far right, fascist right, libertarian right, tech bros. And so those are the same people that are always going on about fusion. In Elon Musk's case, that are going to colonize Mars, right? And so I think that we're going to see, and we've already kind of saw even Democrats jumping on, with all of the above energy policy, that nuclear was starting to make a comeback. And I think we're going to see it again. And I think AI and data centers are going to give the opportunity to drop the pretense of small modular reactors, because that's kind of been how Democrats, at least in Illinois, have couched it, that there's new technology and it's safer, and we can have smaller modular, which gives up the entire economies of scale that is nuclear's whole thing, right? That one plant can produce so much. But I think we're just going to see across the board in mainstream political, discourse, a reemergence of nuclear tied to this AI energy demand, because it's only going to keep increasing.
Well, and they're going to say it's tied to data centers, which are not necessarily for artificial intelligence. And when you say it's, what'd you call it, concentrated power, the nuclear power plants, as opposed to distributed renewables?
Yeah, the economies of scale, basically concentrated power. That one plant could just produce a huge amount.
I see that as an issue of control, because there's no reason why distributed renewables with batteries cannot provide the power for any purpose. It's just, if you got control of a nuke, you got one. It's one thing. Whereas, solar panels, wind generators, diverse ownership, they may say, we're not going to power your damn data center because of what it's doing, or your AI system. So I think that's another problem with nuclear power. It's so centralized that it lends itself to authoritarian regimes.
Yeah, and and again, with kind of how total it is, we're already seeing it overlap. So when you said, there may be some, in a distributed power system, there may be some providers that say, no, we're not going to power that. We're seeing that filter into other things. Like there's big push against Spotify because their owner's big in military AI, right? There's similar pushes have happened at Google. There's similar pushes that have happened at places like Google and Apple to say, we don't want our AI, like even from the pro AI people, we don't want it to fund genocide. We don't want it funding, war machines. And so, it's really filtering into everything. And Spotify and all those things are using AI, right? We're all sharing our raps for the year. And what have we all listened to? And there's not a person crunching those numbers, right? Creating those graphics and those things that we're sharing. So it's really, and that's the hard thing about a pause, which, I 100% support But as I don't know how realistic a pause is. Even in progressive states, even in Europe, I'm not seeing any momentum for a pause. And it's one of those things that I don't even know how you pause. I feel like we've reached a critical mass, and it's growing so fast. It's integrated so fast. I don't think these companies, these investors, and certainly not the Trump administration, are going to stop. And I don't even know if I don't know what kind of law. I'm not confident in governments globally to enforce it. Right? If we get the pause and we stop producing, Peter Thiel's just going to go into a bunker and keep going. Right? And so now we've got literal supervillains happening with, not that we don't already, but that I don't know the feasibility of it. I don't know the framework that it can happen within. This is a revolutionary moment in many ways. Andrew Hager says there's a chance the AI bubble will eventually burst. I agree. I saw reporting about how much of the U.S. GDP growth was AI, and we're screwed. It's all in, all in that sector.
Yeah, but that's a stock market bubble I think people are referring to. So the financial bubble bursts, but that doesn't mean the AI companies haven't got the capital to keep moving ahead. It just means a lot of people got suckered into the stock market in a frenzy. What do they call it? A bubble. And the bubble will burst, but the underlying technology will still be there and still keep advancing.
And it'll consolidate.
And I guess the reason they're selling stocks, new issues, is to raise money for data centers.
Yeah.
But, if the stock market value collapses, that doesn't mean you can't raise money for data centers through new stock issues or borrowing, or having governments bond for you.
Yeah, and that collapse will likely lead to a consolidation, right? All smaller AI companies and even some bigs will collapse, but they won't cease to exist. Their data won't go away. Their training won't go away. Their algorithms won't go away. They'll be consumed at pennies on the dollar by a larger one. Thinking about it reminds me of the whole GameStop thing on the stock market a few years ago, where Wall Street Bets on Reddit, and then it expanded, and by the all these people are buying GameStop, and it skyrocketed, and whole investment firms, whole vulture capitalist firms collapsed because they had shorted GameStop, and they got caught in their short, and they didn't have the funds, and so they collapsed. But when the smoke cleared, the winner was BlackRock. Right after all of this turmoil, after all of this, manipulation of the market, which was what it was on all fronts, from the people who were shorting it in the beginning to the people who caused them to get trapped in their short, to the people, the sharks like BlackRock that jumped in when blood was in the water. At the end of the day, BlackRock came out as the who profited most from it. And so I think when these bubbles burst, especially when we're just talking like stock and economics, with something like AI, it doesn't go away, right? This isn't the end of manufacturing in the United States, where we have big abandoned factories that just sit and rot. The AI is it's digital, and someone else will buy it. And so I think we'll see a consolidation, which is, again, likely not going to be good for the rest of us. Yeah. And we're seeing it. eDay brought it into the. It's already a problem, right? We've all seen the media. The consolidation of media chart, where it shows you who owns and the branches to show the 5 or 6, and that's still happening. We just had the purchase of Paramount by Ellison, and then now Paramount's now there's a bidding war over Netflix, right? but we've all seen that. The same thing exists in almost every sector. One of my favorite charts like that is the tools one as a woodworker, to see who own, what big conglomerates own all these competing tool companies, right? And so. Let's see.
Green Garrett, Chat GPT and other models get a large amount of their training data from publicly available data like Wikipedia pages and Reddit posts. And he goes on, Chat GPT doesn't really create new knowledge. It spits back out data it was trained on based on a model that guesses what you want to see. You can find out that same information in libraries, websites, etc. It's just faster. You're sitting on your butt and you ask GPT and it spits it right back to you instead of going to the library or looking through the websites yourself. So it becomes a convenience. I mean, I confess, now that it's on my different search engines, I use it as a shortcut to see if it gets to sources that I want. But, I check my sources, and what the smart, AI answer is often wrong. I mean, really wrong. Sometimes the opposite of right. You can't just take that and run with it. You got to check it out.
And when you consider, like, Green Garrett said, that a lot of its data is just scraped from the public internet, it's been trained on a lot of bad information, right? It's the idea that the internet is full of bad information is nothing new. But we've used it, right? We've used it to, create these knowledge factories, as they would like to be seen. Though, as Garrett, said, it's not actually creating new knowledge. It's just regurgitating Mad Libs of what it's read. And it's really interesting when you start looking at, the training stuff, because it's been trained a lot on it's scraped from the internet, and it's been trained a lot on, reports, professional information, things that have been published, right? So all of your academic work. And so we're pulling from these two kind of poles of writing, right? Social media on one side and professional work on the other. And it's one of my pet peeves, is AI checkers that they're using in schools now, because the cyclical nature of it, right? We took professionally written academic works and we taught AI to write like that, and then we created checkers to check for that. And so we're accusing, students who are being trained in college to write professionally of writing professional, of being AI because they're writing professionally, right? There's AI, I see it all the time. Like, oh, they used the Oxford comma. They used an M dash. Anyone who uses Microsoft Word uses an M dash because it does it automatically, right? I saw once someone's like, it repeated things in threes. It gave reasons of this, and this, and therefore it is AI. And it's like, that's a long-standing rule of threes. Is a long-standing public speaking thing. It's a way that you write effectively. It's all long been a strategy. So now we're using AI to combat AI, and we're ruining kids' futures over it. It's a mess. Human F Being says, can we train AI to be objective? And I think, Howie mentioned earlier, who is influencing the AI, right? It's these right-wing tech bros. If we look at Grok, right, Twitter or X's AI, I mean, it's just openly right-wing libertarian. And then it gets caught and they come up with an excuse, but it always seems to find its way back to white genocide, no matter what you're talking about. And so we do have that kind of manipulation, but part of it for me too, when I think about how we've trained it, is what have we trained it on? Right? We've trained it on the scrapings of the internet and published works from businesses, from academics, anything that's just been published. And so, published publicly. And we've done that from sources in a right-wing white supremacist society. So of course, we've pulled the whole background, of U.S. history, and shocker, it's not going to have some great views. So I
Well, the
don't
other
know. I
thing
mean,
it does, I think, is in order to, attract more interaction, is it reinforces your own biases. I've experimented by asking a question about Ukraine from the viewpoint of a Russian or, Putin, and from the viewpoint of Ukrainians. And it tells me I'm right, and starts from that premise and then, elaborates. It's a very different answer to a question about the same event. And so you got to keep that in mind. The thing's going to try to entice you by reinforcing your own biases and prejudices, what it thinks you want.
Yeah, it's very much the chat bots in particular are affirmational. They support what you are doing, right? They want to keep you engaging. They want you to keep feeding. Like if the chat bot's telling you things you don't want to hear, truth or not, you're probably going to stop talking to the chat bot, right? You probably went to the chat bot because you stopped talking to your friends because they told you were the problem, right? Your therapist told you your problem. Their parents told you were the problem, and now you're talking to the chat bot, and the chat bot's the first thing that's ever said, "Man, everyone else sucks." You're right, And so the chatbot, you have to remember that chatbot's not new. It's not designed to be neutral. It's designed to keep you engaging, right? And so that, again, looping back to control, right? It's a tool who's controlling it. And then I think, looking at the question of can we train AI to be objective? Whew, as someone with a political philosophy, like a degree in political philosophy, we've opened a big question there just by using the word objective, right? What does it mean? If history is written by the victors and it's just pulling from public information, does it even have the capability? Do we have the capability? So I think there's always going to be biases, and I think that anything we build, we're going to touch. We're gonna, and our even unconsciously, it's gonna seep in. So the real key, and Ide had a good, where was it? It's making online posts questionable, right? We've got to find a way to, and like I said, I've retrained myself. Where if I see something on social media, I'm going to check. I'm going to Google first. I'm going to see if anyone is actually covering this. And then, as Ide says, the other side happens too, right? When those legitimate sources, when those journalistic sources are not covering it, and then it's only happening on social media, it becomes very, very difficult to kind of nail down what objective is and all that. So. I do think there are people out there that are trying, right? There are some conscientious, tech people, but they're definitely the minority. And
Agreeing here.
I assume this is Garrett's response.
Unless we create a true AI like Data, the android on Star Trek, then AI or any computer algorithm doesn't think, and results depend on how the algorithm is built and or the data it is given. So that's a capital D for Data. So Star Trek had a
character named Data that was an android. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But even then, like Data was a person in a place that was taking in, what he perceived. And so, there's, I don't know, the idea of objectivity is just very, very difficult. And how do you build it, right? By building something objective, you're almost breaking the objectivity by definition. And the source of that training is going to guide what you think is objective when you don't, and don't know, until and then that's going to clash with privacy, right? If we want a truly objective AI, then it needs to have all data. Otherwise, with limited data, it cannot be objective. And so if that is our goal, then we have to give up on privacy concerns. So.
And what's objective depends on what you're asking.
Yeah.
There are a million things to ask about out there. And so, just thinking of journalism, what they cover, what questions they ask reflects a point of view. And of course, the answers they get, did a drone hit a certain residential building in Kyiv yesterday? I mean, I think we can agree that, objectively that happened because there are eyewitnesses, there's video, there's a burned out apartment building. It's pretty hard to say that didn't happen. So you can agree objectively, but if you're not even looking for that, then, your view of, say, the Russia-Ukraine war is very different. If you don't even see these bombing of civilian residences because you're not even looking for them.
Yeah, so when I was a preschool teacher, I taught 3 to 6 year olds, and every week I got 1 hour to teach the 4 to 6 year olds who weren't napping about anything I want. And it ranged from science to humanities. And so I had this 1 hour a week that was just mine. I had the whole school of 4 to 6 year olds, and we would, talk about anything we wanted. And so I had curriculum that I built up to talk. I had a series on the planets that took this many weeks. I had a series on, the evolution of life that took this many weeks. But I started every year with, what do you guys want to learn about? Right. And I would take some of that and I would integrate it into my year-long, curriculum. And 1 year in that session, this little 6-year-old raised her hand and she said, how do we know things? So I had to start with that, right? I couldn't do that in 6 months. That was the immediate next week. I needed to go home. I needed to start researching. I needed to build this, 45-minute discussion with 4 to 6-year-olds about how do we know things? And as I usually did, I opened with asking them the question, and their responses was books, TV, the internet, but how do we know things, right? What Howie was talking about, how do we come to the consensus? How do we go through the hypothesis? And so we talked about, the scientific method a little bit. But in that case, we talked about the rocks on the playground. And I said, how sometimes you guys find those little rocks with the spirals on them? And they're like, yes. Well, when one of you found them, it was cool. When 2 of you found them, it was interesting. Now that 5 of you have found them, something's going on, right? We have found evidence multiple times, repeated. So now we start looking. What do we think they look like? Oh, they might fit together. They kind of look like the stalk of an animal. So now we dive into the books, right? And we start looking at that. They look kind of like this thing. And what we end up finding out is that these fossils is what we are finding are from an animal, not a plant, though it does look like a flower, that lives underwater and is still alive today, right? And so we can go actually study them in the real world. AI is not doing any of that, right? It's skipping out on all of that gaining of knowledge. I have a guest. It's skipping out on all of that gaining of knowledge. And so without that, and it's part of it's the next step in a trend of the steps away from that, right? I remember how mad I was when, these phones came out for the first time and my friends could fact check me. Because, I've got a degree in political philosophy. I'm a bullshitter, right? And usually I'm usually somewhat right. I can engineering logic my way through things. But then people could all of a sudden, well, Chris, I don't think that's right. Oh, you are right. But so we've been on this path of separating ourselves from the sources of knowledge and just taking what we're told at face value. And AI represents a big and potentially dangerous step in that. I'm sorry, Andrew. Andrew said there has to be some way we can pressure governments around the world to help us and push for digital literacy, digital privacy protections. I'm sorry, I'm trying the best not to panic, but it's getting harder and harder for me to keep it together.
Well, as I understand it, Europe is doing a better job, and of
They're
course we
always a
can
few
push
steps
for
ahead.
it. You know, I think stopping the data centers is, one place where there's some leverage right now, at least to slow down the process. But what I'm still trying to get my head around is what kind of regulations. The pause idea sounds good to me, even though I quite don't understand what a pause means. Because I'm not into the technology that much. But slow down and let's figure out where we are, what the dangers are, how we can use this safely, and so yeah, don't panic, Andrew. Just be looking for groups that are starting to work on this. Was it you that mentioned looking at that group? What was it?
Yes, it was.
Because you've mentioned that before, and I have actually, looked for them. The group Fight for the Future, which had been around a while.
Yeah.
Dealing with things like net neutrality and some of the monopolization of the telecommunications. So
Yeah, and it's one of the things that makes talking about AI so hard is that it's so entrenched, it's so ingrained in everything at this point, and so it's hard not to get doomy and gloomy, and it's hard to keep on one track, right? Because there's all these environmental questions, right? But there's also all these privacy questions. There's also all of the all these the job loss questions, data, economic impacts, just transitions. And so when we talk about and so Green Garrett, who's been posting, Green Garrett and I have wrote a white paper on AI. And when we submitted it to some people to be reviewed at 30, 35 pages, we were told to cut it down to 5 to 10, and we just quit. We didn't know how to do it. But the reason it hasn't been published is because we kind of paused, like we ran out of we didn't know what to do when it came to regulation. It's really hard to we can talk to get past the slogans, to get past the first few sentences, to see how does this really work. What is a people first regulation? What does people first AI ownership mean? What do these things, what does a different model look like? It's hard to even envision that, let alone advocate for it in the world we live in. So that, I think that's, the pause people, I think, are calling for all they can at this point, because I don't think we as a movement, a society, a people have a clear vision on what's next here. Especially when one of the paths, as Howie's brought up, is AI extinction, right? Even if it's unlikely, it's kind of frightening how unreactive, let alone proactive, governments have been.
Yeah, well, the leadership in our government's figuring out how to make billions of dollars off it. It's a blind spot for these people. It's like I keep going back to the so-called peace negotiations in Ukraine. It's a land for peace real estate deal. It's not anything to do with human rights, democracy, sustainable peace. They want to. They're talking about data centers and that deal. Both using Russian fossil fuels and the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. 6 reactors there. It's these people are blinded by money.
Ide said, all these groups and movements are siloed. We need to unite. I don't even think it needs to go to the point of unite. I threw this one up because I think it's a really good point. I think one of the strengths that data center, but in general, data center specifically, but in general, anti-AI or AI regulatory organizing needs to take, is to leverage those connections. During Occupy, I organized in my local group teach-ins, and I had a professor come and give a presentation on ACT UP, the AIDS awareness and LGBTQ organization. And one of the things she really centered on was how amazing ACT UP was with connecting their cause of HIV/AIDS to other active movements and active issues. So one day they'd be at Wall Street talking about big pharma. Another day they'd be at a hospital talking about talking about healthcare. They'd go into talking about workplace stuff, all of these things. But they were able to make those connections, and it really amplified their voice. And so I think, like Ide said, all these movements are siloed, and I actually, because of the totality of AI does have the ability to start linking up, to start leveraging and bringing these groups into a conversation, right? You care about jobs, you care about the environment, you care about privacy. All of a sudden, we all have something we can talk about, right? We have something we can organize around, and we can spread the load, right? We don't have to be an expert in everything, because that's one of the things that makes it really hard to talk about AI, even as someone who's done a lot of research, is just, it gets muddled. There's so much. It's so all-encompassing. It's so widespread. It has so many touch points that unless you have a really focused ability. And so by making those connections, right, the environmentalists can talk about the environmental issues, and the privacy people can talk about privacy, and we can get maybe we can get unions on the right side of these things for once, right? Maybe we can get the AFL-CIO do what it never did for a pipeline, and that say we don't want a data set, we don't want data center jobs, But its totality offers that as the opportunity, right? So when we're organizing around these things, we can't let ourselves get into those silos, right? As I said, the anti-data center organizing I'm seeing is almost exclusively environmental. It's led by Sierra clubs, right? And so I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's a key area we need to address. But it's leaving a lot of room on the table for the industry to say, well, you've got your environmental concerns, but we've got the AFL-CIO on our side for jobs. We've got, the politicians on our side. And so if we bring these other groups in, we can apply pressure from multiple directions.
Hey, before we finish up here, I'd like to go back to a question that was raised early by Bruce Griffin, because it's, something that people often ask about. It was at 316. And he says, I really, really bought into Howie in 2020. And I really believe that almost everything he says mirrors my beliefs as well. But what I don't understand is how does someone like Jill Stein also become the Green Party nomination the next cycle? So yeah, Jill and I have our political differences. So, it does raise that question. Just to go back over what happened, I was considering again in 24 running, but it was a question, do I have an organization? Because in 2020, basically there was an organization looking for a candidate, and they recruited me. And then that organization, there were some political differences over international issues with some of those people. Others, like, Chris had 2 babies. He had to go back to full-time work. Others, had, job obligations. So the old campaign
we lost both of our
was not in a position to do it. But I was under a lot of pressure to run again. And then Cornel West said, I'll do it. And I didn't realize how relieved I was that he had stepped up, because I said, I can go with Cornel, because I was not in a position to do it. And, running a campaign like that is all consuming. And it's really, although COVID kind of interrupted our campaign, it's 2 full years of just your whole life, from dawn to dusk, dawn to midnight, So, I supported Cornel, and then he quit the Greens to run as himself, and basically took himself out of the race because he wasn't going to be on the ballot. maybe that's what he wanted to do. And then Jill was in a position to step up. So, there was really no competition. Unlike when I ran in 2020, we did have a competitive primary. So that's how we ended up with Jill, without much debate about some of the political differences having to do with eco-socialism versus capitalism, an internationalist foreign policy versus a campus policy that supports any state, capitalist, authoritarian, whatever, who's in conflict with the U.S. And so there's some differences there. But that's how, Jill ended up being the nominee. It was, we were, when Cornell decided he was going to run by himself, it was, I think, November of 2023. In the primaries, getting on the ballot, the deadlines are starting shortly. So, Jill had been through this, so she was able to, and had the personal resources and the connections to pull together a campaign. I did not. So,
yeah, it's a short list of, people in the party or party adjacent that can run a serious campaign. And at the late stage that Cornell stepped out, that list got even shorter, like 2-3 names, including Howie. And so, yeah, at that point, Jill was really the only option. And I will say, most states still did their best to run a competitive primary. We had multiple candidates on the ballot in Illinois. Jill did not get all of our delegates. But, at that point, coming in, starting the game late, and the name recognition that she had, and Cornell would have had the same success in the primaries, that I don't think even if there was a competitive primary, it would have been truly competitive and he would have been any risk not to be endorsed. I just don't think he wanted to run. He didn't think he should have to run. He wanted to be coronated.
Well, and I also wonder if he suddenly realized he might be the spoiler. So he wanted to take himself off most ballots so he wouldn't be. In any case, that's an answer to that question.
Yep.
So,
well, yeah, thanks for having me on to talk about AI.
Thanks for coming on. I'm still learning about this. I'm way behind. And, I'll be here next week. I do have a request out to Zach Polanski to come on the podcast soon. He's the new leader of the Green Party of England and Wales, which has tripled its membership from about 50,000 to over 170,000 last time I looked. It's polling ahead of the Labour Party. Zach has a lot of people compare him to Zoran Mamdani in terms of his personal appeal on the media. And I think that's true. And his program, it's for the people rather than the businesses. So, I think it'll be good for us to learn from him how they do it in England and Wales. Differences. They have a membership party. We don't. They elect their leader. Our leaders are elected by a national committee indirectly by the grassroots. Theirs is elected directly by the grassroots. And, another thing that, strikes me is our platform just keeps growing and growing by aggregation. And then there's stuff in there that's obsolete and it's very long. What they do in Britain is they write an election manifesto every time there's a national election. And then they pass policy resolutions in between that are dated and they're put in a policy book. And actually it's not public anymore, but the members can find out what the position of the party was at a certain date. And it's easier, I think, to change and put in context what are now platform planks in the U.S. Green Party platform that were written, years ago, decades ago, and, maybe are not where we're at now. So anyway, there's a lot we can learn from them. And so I'm looking forward to having him as a guest, but don't have him scheduled yet. He's been very busy. He's, very much in the news in Britain. So anyway, we'll be here next week and looking forward to seeing everybody again.
Thank you.